I recently refinished the case of a musical cuckoo clock I bought on eBay. This is what it looked like on arrival, thoroughly dirty and broken in a few places. The short version of my story is that refinishing the case was time-consuming and damaged the case in several places. My advice is to not refinish a cuckoo clock case unless you really have to. As I usually do, I cleaned the case, surround, and crown with Gojo hand cleaner, the non-pumice version. When that was done, the surround and crown looked lovely. And the case looked good in a contrasting color. The pendulum was missing. So I bought a new bare wood pendulum stick and bob from Time Savers. Since I had no experience staining wood, I knew I probably wouldn't be able to match the color of the surround and crown. So I decided to stain everything with a walnut color water-based stain. One surprise was that the walnut is a very dark color, darker than I expected. Almost all the carving details were lost. The big surprise, though, was that the surround and crown didn't stain uniformly. I'd hoped it would look good when it dried, but it was still blotchy after drying. Here you can see clearly how bad my staining job was. Most of the surround stained, but it left these unstained areas. The case didn't fare much better. It was very unevenly stained. At this point, I realized that the case must have had some sort of finish on it, which prevented the stain from staining the wood. The stain was just lying on top of the original finish. What a mess. I decided it was time to learn how to properly strip a cuckoo clock, so I started researching. I found plenty of videos on stripping furniture, but nothing about how to strip all the finish off of intricate carvings like you find on a cuckoo clock. I'll later show you the tools and safety gear I settled on. I had a can of Zip Strip in the anticipation of stripping an Ansonia clock case, so I decided to use that. Zip Strip is a jelly-like goo that sticks nicely to wood. I heated the workshop to 65 degrees Fahrenheit, about 18 C, applied the stripper, and waited about an hour before removing the stripper and finish with a toothbrush. It worked well, working on one piece one day, then working on it again the next day, and repeating that until it was cleaned up. I've since learned that it's a really bad idea to let stripped paint dry. So now I work on a part of a piece until I'm satisfied, and then move to the next. I've also learned that strippers can remove glue. As I was working on the crown, the bird suddenly just fell off. Fortunately, that gave me a chance to strip the finish off the whole back of the bird and the part of the crown that the bird sat on. When I was done stripping the crown and the crown parts were dry, I glued the bird back in place with white glue and a clamp. I should have used hide glue instead because hide glue is reversible. It can be removed with a heat gun. Moving on to the back of the crown, I was enthusiastically scrubbing with a toothbrush and forgot how fragile parts of the carving are. I leaned too hard on a leaf and broke the tip of the leaf off. I felt it was unlikely that the stripped leaf tip would ever match the stripped surround, so I decided to leave it off. I'm not sure why I thought that. It should have stripped and stained just fine. Looking at the broken surround, I realized that someone had broken off the opposite leaf tip before I bought the clock, and I hadn't noticed. Since the two leaves were now symmetrical, it was hard to notice the damage, so I decided to leave the tip of the leaf off. Stripping the surround and crown went really well. Here's the result, against the to-be-stripped case. You can see a few black spots remaining. I could have removed those had I known to strip a piece until it was clean and not to let it dry until it was done. When I started stripping the flat surfaces of the case, I found out one tip I'd read about. Use a scraper after stripping goo as a first step, removing a lot of the paint and finish in one whack. Here I was afraid that I had applied too much pressure and gouged the wood. Fortunately, it turned out okay later. I continued stripping the case, still making the mistake of making one pass over the whole case, then returning the next day to strip the remaining bits which had dried hard. I found I could remove the scraper's blade and use it to get into the narrow underside of the roof, scraping parts that were hard to reach. Of course, the case doors had to come off. I stored them and their mounting hardware in pillboxes labeled L and R. I've since learned from clock conservator Matthew Reed that to avoid confusion of my left versus the clock's left, I should have labeled them proper left and proper right, to mean the clock's left and the clock's right. That is, looking out from the back of the clock to its front. Remember that I said strippers can dissolve glue? I found it can also delaminate plywood if you leave it on too long. Note the cracked wood from the first layer of plywood peeling up a bit. At this point, I ran out of zip strip and tried to buy another can of it. Unfortunately, the original formula has been discontinued, and I could only find milder, non-toxic strippers. After reading various reviews, I settled on Clean Strip Green paint and varnish remover. Happily, it doesn't require wearing a respirator, and it isn't flammable. While searching for a new paint stripper, I came across Afterwash, a product that removes the stripper residue. It's very flammable and requires a respirator, but it does a nice job of cleaning up the wood after stripping. Here is the stripping setup I used. For safety, I have thick nitrile gloves, safety glasses, and for the afterwash, a respirator. I lay down papers to keep the stripper and the afterwash off the bench. I use pyramid stands to keep the case off the papers. I use a paintbrush to apply the stripper. The picture doesn't show the second brush I use to apply the afterwash. I use a brass brush to remove the finish. It can scratch softer wood, so I test it first. I use a toothbrush for woods that the brass brush would scratch. I mainly use this on the surround and crown. I use a clean shop rag for wiping off the brushes and for wiping off the last of the stripper from the case. I use a jar to hold the small amount of stripping goo. I also had a second jar to try to avoid contaminating the goo when I brushed on another coat of stripper, but now I've decided to just use the one jar. The picture doesn't show a second jar that I used to hold a small amount of afterwash. I kept the lid on that jar until it was ready to use. One thing I don't like about Clean Stripper is that it's much less gooey than the original Zip Strip. It quickly runs off a vertical wall, and you can see here how it even pulls away from the edges of a flat surface. Because of this thinness, I would brush stripper on just one horizontal surface of the case, wait about 20 minutes, reapply or rebrush to make sure the stripper covers the surface, repeating until the stripper had been on an hour. Then I'd use the brass brush to remove the stripper. I'd then reapply more stripper and wait a half hour before using the brass brush again, repeating that process until I was satisfied the surface was fully stripped. By the way, I'd frequently wipe off the brass brush to avoid moving old paint and finish around the wood. Things proceeded slowly. Each surface of the clock case took about an hour and a half. Also, it took a few hours to warm up the workshop each day. At this rate, it took me a couple weeks to strip the clock case. I removed the back door latch so that I could clean and de-rust the latch separately. Also, there was a paper label which gave the title of the tune that the clock originally played. Unfortunately, the stripper destroyed that label. On the good side, I had to replace the musical movement anyway, so the label would have been incorrect. Because I had to strip each surface separately, I found the stripper would drip onto already stripped surfaces, leaving stains and bits of stripped finish. To take care of those stains, when I was finished with all the case surfaces, I did one final strip of the whole case, applying a much thinner layer of stripper and touching up the stripper for a little over 1/2 hour, before a final brush with a brass brush, a final wipe with a clean shop rag, a final brush of afterwash, and a final wipe with another clean rag. Because afterwash is flammable, I laid out that second rag on a metal stand to let it dry. Stripping the doors was a little tricky because they were so small, but they turned out fine. Stripping the stained pendulum stick and bob didn't work so well. The sides of the bob in particular seemed unaffected by the stripper. I recall that the zip strip directions mentioned that it doesn't remove stain. The surround and case must have had some kind of paint and finish on them because they stripped just fine. In contrast, the bob and stick had only stain, which the stripper didn't remove. I researched how to remove just stain and wound up trying diluted bleach, which had almost no effect. I tried sanding the stick and bob to remove the stain, but it didn't turn out well. It left stain on the bob, and I removed too much of the stick for the bob to stay firmly on the stick. I bought a replacement bare wood pendulum and stick and stained them later. Speaking of sanding, I had to do a light sanding of the whole case with 220 grit sandpaper because the stripper and afterwash raised the grain of the wood. As I mentioned, the stripping caused the plywood to delaminate in places. Here I'm regluing 2 parts of the bottom of the back doorway. As with any glue job, I clamped the glued parts so that they would keep their shape. I also glued back 2 bits of plywood that had broken off the bottom of the case. Here's another bit of damage. The inside of the examination door had delaminated. I reglued it. Because the bottom of the back doorway had delaminated, it had swollen a little bit. That swelling made the top of the back door too tall to fit. I sanded the door down until it fit. Here you can see that I didn't try to strip the back door because doing that would have obliterated the original clock label and instructions. Now that the case was stripped and repaired, I was ready to stain it. I did a test with English chestnut stain, which turned out well, far better than the too dark walnut I'd used before. I then stained all the parts of the case, hanging them to let them drip dry. After 5 minutes, I wiped the excess stain off and left the case to dry. Unfortunately, the bare wood pendulum bob I'd bought didn't stain uniformly. I suspect some oil from when it was manufactured or packed. I should have given it a light stripping and sanding before staining it. The next day, I brushed all the case parts with boiled linseed oil as a finish. Let them dry 15 minutes, then wipe them dry. Because linseed oil generates heat as it dries, I put the oil-soaked rags and newspapers in the driveway to dry. Because it was windy, I spread some gravel over them to keep them from blowing away. Here is the refinished case, which I'm very pleased with despite all the damage I had to repair. As a reminder, here is the clock as I received it, and here is the refinished clock. As I said at the beginning of this video, don't refinish a cuckoo clock unless you're prepared to spend a lot of time stripping the case and more time to reglue the plywood bits that delaminate during stripping.